they're landing on this tree. So great. We're settling in. I'm glad they didn't go too far. Oh my gosh, they're beautiful.
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh my God, look at that.
They're harmless when they're in a swarm situation because what they did is they filled themselves up with honey before they left because they could be in a situation where they're homeless for like 3 days.
Oh my God.
I know it, right?
That is so cool.
So they have nothing to protect. The queen is somewhere in there. And I'm just amazed. It's like National Geographic. It's almost like they just redesigned my little tree. Has anybody heard of the windshield effect? Well, I'm in my 60s and we did a lot of camping when I was a kid. And driving from Wisconsin to the Badlands, my dad would constantly have the windshield wiper fluid on. There were so many insects. There were big ones that would like splat on the screen, on the windshield. There were small ones, but every once in a while, Dad would have to get it and just rub off some of those big ones. I drove from Minneapolis to Rapid City and barely had to use my windshield wiper washer fluid. There is a huge decline in insects. I know people don't necessarily like insects, but they're very important in our ecosystem. We need insects to feed the birds, to feed the fish, to pollinate our food. 78% of our country's land is privately owned. As a homeowner, I just have a small spot in Minneapolis. I've gotten rid of most of my lawn and planted native plants. I enjoy seeing so many new insects that I've never even seen before. Wasps, sweat bees, different kinds of bumblebees. All right in my backyard. If you're a landowner, what would be really wonderful is if you have an oak tree in your backyard to try to get rid of that lawn and put plants under there.
My very talented friend Leslie Pilgrim came up with this idea based on Doug Tallamy's work, and Doug Tallamy focuses his research on keystone plants, plants that support really high diversity of caterpillar species. And caterpillars, as I talked about earlier with food webs, really are foundational in helping to feed birds. Most terrestrial birds feed their chicks caterpillars. So behind me is a 150-year-old white oak tree. And Leslie came up with this idea, a concept called soft landings. And in many residential yards, people just have turf grass under many of these trees that are supporting the caterpillars. But thinking again about our gardens and different life cycle stages of insects, the idea is to do a planting under a tree like I've done here, where I have a variety of different flowering plants. Northern bedstraw, wild ginger, large-leaved aster, the Jacob's ladder is just finishing blooming. But this, in fact, is the soft landing. So when those caterpillars are up in the tree foliage, consuming the oak tree leaves and ready to pupate, in many cases they will come and either crawl down or drop to the ground by a silken thread. And if they're dropping down onto turf grass, the risk of them getting killed is quite high. People are mowing frequently, and where are they going to travel to find enough refuge? So having these diverse plantings under keystone trees called soft landings provides that refuge for that caterpillar species to complete its pupation and life cycle and eventually turn into an adult. In my yard, when we purchased this house, the previous homeowner had planted this buckeye tree, and we debated about cutting it down for maybe planting a more locally appropriate species. But then I found that the bumblebees and the hummingbirds absolutely love the flowers of this buckeye. So right now, you won't see any bumblebees foraging around on the ground level. They're way up in the tree on the buckeye flowers. So I think of trees such as this that are insect pollinated, I call them vertical flower power, right? So perhaps a homeowner doesn't want to plant an extensive perennial garden to support pollinators, but they could select a specific type of tree, whether it's a buckeye in this case, or a black cherry, there are Kentucky coffee trees. We have a number of interesting native trees to choose from here in Minnesota that are insect pollinated and would help support bees and other flower visiting insects. Right now in my garden, I have wild geranium blooming, which is a native woodland wildflower. The flower is visited by a number of bees, mason bees, bumblebees, sweat bees, but there is a specific specialist of this flowering plant, a type of mining bee, and the females have this wonderful upside down pollen collection where I call it the butts up pollen collection. They will dive their head down into the middle of the flower and then vigorously rub the reproductive parts of the flower that are producing pollen, and it's really fun to watch. And then this other flowering plant with the yellow flowers is called Golden Alexanders, and it's in the genus Zizia, and it belongs to the carrot family, which the carrot family plants have this typical flat-topped umbel-shaped flower. And this flowering plant, because the flowers are so tiny and shallow, supports a number of different flower visiting insects. You'll find flies and solitary wasps and a number of bees. And then we also have a specific bee specialist, this tiny mining bee that you can see on the back of the flower. It's a cool morning, so she's not moving very fast. You've probably seen memes perhaps on social media, leave the leaves. And we, as many of us are here from, originally from Europe, we brought over a very tidy gardening ethic with us. So we have this real need to clean up our gardens, and that doesn't really work well with a lot of insect life cycles, especially ones that we think of as being beneficial, the wasps that we already talked about, bees, but there's a number of other beneficial insects that have some part of their life cycle in leaf litter. So gardening practices are slowly changing, and people are understanding that you need to leave leaf litter in many cases. It provides insulation and then that habitat for whether it's an adult beneficial insect or a larva or a pupa. There's different life stages that would be harboring under leaf litter. Back to that oak tree that's 150 years old, and the quantity of leaf litter that drops onto this soft landings planting every year that I don't remove. And all of these native woodland perennials don't have any problem of pushing up through that heavy layer of leaf litter. And because I have almost like a green mulch or a soft landings planting here, that leaf litter is underneath helping with soil health and all of that wonderful microhabitat that we talked about that many insects need. In fall, of course, the leaf litter piles up on the ground, and it provides this wonderful insulation layer over the winter, and it not only helps plants survive freeze-thaw cycles, but many insects are overwintering between the ground and that layer of leaf litter, and it actually creates this wonderful microclimate that is warmer than it would be above the snow or in the ground. So insects such as the early emerging morning cloak butterfly will overwinter as adults. come out really early in the spring, in March, early April. So they are relying on these little microclimate or warm places that are provided by leaf litter. Similarly, our native bumblebees, the new queens, dig a very shallow burrow in the ground. So having that ground exposed, if someone has removed all that leaf litter, it is much colder and it makes it more difficult for those insects to survive the winter.